In other words, I mean, as one of the thinkers in this I cite, Cheslov said, God is there in human thinking for what is actually impossible.
Right.
You're trapped. You're going to be killed. You're going to be murdered. You're going to be killed the next morning. That's a fixed element. You can't do anything about it. Nothing. No one can help you. You're done for.
Right.
What do you do then? I suggest you won't. I mean, if you're in a very sumptuous cell before you're going to be, you won't reach for John Dewey.
Right.
You won't reach for John Stuart Mill. You'll reach for some traditional text, or maybe for something, a poem, or a song, or a memory, or a memory. I don't. I mean, most of when they think of struggle, these liberal humans, they're thinking of some sort of campus conflict.
Right.
In which there's not, in the end, much for them to lose, actually. And so, I find those kinds of conflicts mostly comical.
Yeah.
Really, real human conflicts are much more desperate affairs, and they're nearly always sort of accompanied by taking up some sort of, among the protagonists, some sort of religious or quasi-religious assumptions. I think it's better to be open to that. It's not kind of absolutely universal. I mean, there were people who died in the struggle against Nazism who didn't have any religious beliefs at all. There's a poet I rather like, called Keith Douglas. He was killed in the desert in Africa at the age of 24, but the poetry he did was extraordinarily good, even though he was a very young man. And he had no beliefs of any religious kind at all, and he certainly didn't believe in liberal humanism or anything like that. He was asked what he was fighting for. He said, well, I'm actually fighting against Nazism.
Right.
And of course, people say, well, what are you fighting? You must have something you're fighting for. He said, no, I'm fighting against Nazism. After it's defeated, if I'm around, he wasn't actually, but then we'll think about what to do next. I'm fighting against Nazism. I think it's a very profound observation. And he was a tremendous poet. If you want to read a poet who's really stepped outside of Christianity, not like the First World War poets like Owen and others, they were all saturated in theism or humanism. He stepped right outside that, and yet he went there and he volunteered. He volunteered for the major battles. He actually disobeyed orders to get into one of the major battles, and he was killed.
Wow.
But he wrote some wonderful, though in some ways stark poetry, describing his experiences in those wars. So people can. I think there's a wide. It's simply not true that heroism and nobility require these kind of large-scale kind of beliefs. And I think actually the worse people's situation is, the less they're likely to find kind of rationalistic humanism a plausible mythology, because it's been. I mean, certainly, in Russia that wasn't the case. I mean,
right.
What happened immediately? Communism collapsed, is that various types of religion, not always ones I would myself find attractive or pleasant, but kind of remote. So it's a permanent feature of human life, and but they're real serious conflicts. They're not campus. It's not campus theater. They're really serious
right.
Conflicts, and that's what I mean. Just as, by the way, a feature, you can tell how bad things are by how black the humor is in general. Really black humor tends to go with really bad situations. And as humor gets milder and more sort of humanistic, you might say, you can probably guess that things are getting a bit better.
This is you're a fascinating person to talk to, and I've enjoyed.
I found our conversation very interesting and stimulating. Right?
Thank you, and I appreciate your book very much, and I'll be.
And
sharing
I appreciate
this.
your questions, and they've been searching ones, but also very, very, very interesting. And I say this because it's true, not for any other reason. To me, the most interesting conversations I have are with people who had one set of beliefs or one form of life and then have a different one. I mean, people who've never moved from being lifelong atheists, or maybe became atheists when they were 13 or something, and stay like that forever. On the whole, they're not very interesting to talk to.
Yeah, I understand what you mean, and I think there is a I guess we're in a transition phase, it seems like, in society where people are leaving one set of certainties and grappling for another one, and they aren't easily at hand if they exist at all, and it's a challenging time. And so I appreciate your work, and much the way I appreciate the work of Chris Hedges, who tends to be quite critical without offering a lot of solutions. I asked him once, why are your books so bleak? Like, why don't you offer any? He's like, well, that's your work. My job is, as I see it, is to explain how things are, and hopefully you and all the others get together and figure out what to do about it. Thank you, John. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Well, that's about all we could fit into an hour's conversation. I had so much more I wanted to ask him, and so many thoughts that kept coming up as he spoke. So forgive me for not asking the all-important question that's perhaps on your mind right now, but I hope this is enough to stimulate thought and provoke discussions on your end, wherever you are, and perhaps inspire some additional reading for you. I want to say a few things here in conclusion, just kind of my personal reflections and struggles with the issues that he has raised. I struggle at times to understand what he wants of us. What does he want the reader, the listener, to do in light of what he thinks is the actual state of human affairs? I tend to be a rather pessimistic person myself in my general outlook on the world, and often flirt with nihilism. There's almost something comforting about surrendering to the absurdity of the world and my powerlessness to make any difference whatsoever. And I think John often provides some fodder for one's latent nihilism. At least he does for me. So perhaps I'm drawn to him for that reason, because he gives voice to that inner cynic in me. I also cannot escape, however, my feeling, and perhaps it isn't anything more than a feeling, that life is precious, even sacred in some sense. And if we humans are special, even in the most trivial way, then life is worth fighting for, and not just for mere survival, but also for fullness and richness of life for all of us, as well as our other animal companions. And after thinking about this a great deal, I think what John Gray is responding to in his critiques is the modernist, positivist hubris that often characterizes humanism. I don't always hear it in everybody's expression of humanism, but I have heard it myself, and I've seen these prophets of human progress celebrated by some humanist institutions. And that could easily and understandably give a person the idea that this is humanism, in the same way that popular preachers like Joel Osteen or Rick Warren could give you the idea that this is really all Christianity is. But there's a lot more here. I don't think we need to decide between the optimists and the pessimists. The real challenge of post-theism is to be a realist. Sometimes reality gives us reason to hope, and sometimes it does not. I, like many of you, come from a teleological tradition, a philosophical tradition, Christianity, that is steeped in the idea that history is moving toward a utopian end, that there's a purpose or an aim to history. Leaving Christianity, I was confronted with the reality that there is no promised land. Then, to my surprise, many secular humanist authors were offering a non-theistic promised land, one created by technology and scientific progress. But as with any utopianism, there is much that must be left out if the narrative is to hold together. I think the important thing that Professor Gray is saying repeatedly over the years is that the notion of a secular utopia is a mirage. I desperately want there to be an end to history, and not in the sense of a conclusion, but in the sense of a purpose. I want my life and our collective lives to mean something. I don't want my accomplishments to be washed away like writing in the sand at the beach. Yet, I'm no one in particular. I would not be at all surprised to find, many years from now, or maybe not so many years from now, that my meager accomplishments have amounted to literally nothing. I'm not very bothered by this anymore, but beyond my own life, I don't want to think that the accomplishments of humans over centuries could be eroded or erased so easily. I want to believe that the arc of history bends towards justice. I really do. And if God is not bending it, or at least ensuring that the arc bends, I want to believe that we can bend it, and that goddamn arc is bending. But if I'm completely honest, I don't believe it. At least I don't believe it's inevitable. Perhaps things bend towards justice, perhaps they don't. It really depends on the decisions that we make later on today and tomorrow and the next day. And this is why I don't place much stock in the prophetic declarations of people like Steven Pinker or Michio Kaku, to name just two. It's also why I'm not too bothered by the pessimism of John Gray. Because here again is my short take on humanism. Humanism is a commitment without promises, without hope of salvation or an afterlife or utopia in this life, a commitment to care for one another and build a safer world insofar as it's within our power to do so. I know that I must do what I can do, while I can do it, to make life as fair and enjoyable for as many people as possible. That's my humanism. I think sometimes humanism does turn into a teleological utopian pursuit, as Professor Gray so prolifically points out. But it doesn't need to be rooted in a kind of utopian promise. We can be humanists without promises, and that's where I find myself. Well, that's about all I have time for today. I hope you'll pick up the book and read it if it interests you. Check out some of his shorter writing online. I'll link to a few things and a few reviews in the show notes that I find valuable. And write to me if you have thoughts about this, if you have questions, if you have suggestions for follow-up podcasts or writing that you would be interested in reading. Please write to me at ryan@lifeaftergod.org. If you like the work that we're doing at Life After God, I would encourage you to support us. We have a lot of new plans for this year. You can make a recurring monthly donation to the work that we're doing at Life After God by going to my Patreon page at patreon.com/lifeaftergod. Of course, follow us on social media. All of our social media links can be found at our website, lifeaftergod.org. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. Until next time, my name is Ryan Bell, and this has been the Life After God podcast.